Hello, and welcome to Navigating Student Expectations and Financial Challenges in a Digital Era, held in partnership with Perlego. My name is Sridhu, and I'm the Deputy Editor for Branded Content at THE. Students today expect technology to be integrated seamlessly into their academic journey. But with the many challenges that the sector is facing, this goes beyond just keeping up with trends. It's also about using technology strategically to support flexible and inclusive learning experiences. We have a wonderful panel joining us today to explore how universities can harness technology to elevate learning experiences, improve student outcomes, and prepare graduates for a rapidly evolving digital world. I will now invite them to introduce themselves. Lisa, could we start with you?
Hi there, everyone. I'm Lisa Harris. I'm the Director of Digital Learning at the University of Exeter Business School. And I've had a long-standing interest in technology and education and what's new and what's coming around the corner and how we can transform education for the better, eventually, perhaps, maybe. So yeah, I'm very excited to join this conversation and see what you've all got to say.
Thank you. Matt, could I come to you next?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Matt. I'm Director of Higher Education over at Perlego. I'm also a visiting research fellow at the University of Lincoln, mainly specialising in digital reading practice and digital reading research. So similar to Lisa, I've been in this kind of space for quite a long time and seen a lot of the highs and lows that come from digital learning and a lot of the opportunities and challenges. So looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. Annika, could I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Annika Tyne. I'm the Vice Dean for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the War Holloway Business School at War Holloway University of London. And yeah, I'm coming at this much more from the inclusion and diversity angle and maybe slightly less so from the technology angle. And yeah, but have been in this space of inclusive education for quite a while now.
Thank you. And finally, Chris.
Hi everyone, I'm Chris Umfreville. I'm the Deputy in Education Student Experience in the College of Business and Social Sciences at Aston University in Birmingham. Similar to colleagues, been involved in technology and learning for some time, particularly focused on curriculum design in a number of spheres, and really interested for joining the conversation today and learning more from colleagues in the audience.
Thank you. Before we get started, I would like to mention that this webinar is being recorded and we'll share an on-demand video and a summary article with all the participants after the webinar. We'll also be taking questions from the audience, so please use the Q&A function to post any questions you would like to ask. Today's discussion will also feature insights from the white paper we recently published in partnership with Perlego, called Changing Student Expectations and the Future of Higher Education. So before we delve into the main discussion, I will hand over to Matt for a brief presentation, which will tell us a little bit about the white paper and Perlego. Over to you, Matt.
Sure, thank you very much. So I appreciate that many in the audience may not have heard of Perlego or may not have a full understanding of what we do. So I wanted to just give a bit of a kind of a teaser of who we are and why we're here. So Perlego is a company that was born about 10 years ago from a personal pain point from our CEO Gautier as a postgraduate student looking to get access to the textbooks that he needed for his course, and either couldn't find them, couldn't afford them, saw lots of his peers who actually couldn't get hold of the content from the library or get access to books digitally or physically in a very easy way. And also observing that students actually were trying to access the books they needed for a very short space of time for that kind of 12-week, 15-week period of time in many cases, and then actually often not looking at the books again. What also he observed was that students were often turning to piracy and things like that if they couldn't get access via their library. And so he saw an opportunity to create a new platform. And what's kind of emerged since that initial idea is Perlego really being a product now that is a digital learning tool that is designed to provide unparalleled access to academic text for any of its users. So what that really means is that Students can subscribe to Perlego and universities can purchase Perlego and provide their students with access to over 1.3 million textbooks, all from academic and credible publishers, without any limits on provision or on access. We've spent a huge amount of time working on actually building out a really high quality user experience, because we also have students that pay for Perlego themselves. And we've really invested a lot of resource into ensuring we're building features that help students actually navigate their own prioritization effectively, or their own time management effectively, can discover books that are relevant to their subject area or their area of interest with ease, particularly across such a large library. And what we're finding is that students are actually really actively engaging in a huge variety of books beyond their syllabus as well now. And actually, I think that's possibly the most important thing to highlight here. Whenever I tell people in the community that I work for the Spotify of textbooks, as we're kind of known, I hear time and time again, and I've heard for my whole kind of academic career, focusing on digital reading, well, students don't read. And the thing that I always respond to there is, well, actually, what do you mean? Because I actually have evidence to kind of show the contrary. And these are just a few of the kind of things I wanted to highlight from some of our observations over the last 12 months of users in Perlego. So the most interesting thing here for me, and I'll touch on this throughout the session this afternoon, is the way that students are interacting with text is fundamentally changing. So not only are we seeing students engaging with audiobooks, for example, and audio formats of academic text in a far broader way than historically, but actually we're now seeing that students are going there as the starting point for their engagement with academic literature. The other kind of key thing I guess I would pull out here is actually around students' interaction with learning resources. We've often been in an environment in higher education where access to digital text is kind of limited to the book that is prescribed to you, and that is a limiting factor for students' own sort of discovery in their learning experience. When you look at something like Perlego, where students can access any piece of content that's on our platform without any limits, as you can see from the pie chart on the right-hand side, we're observing that students are actually reading far beyond the prescribed material, because they have that ability to read whatever they like, which for me has been a really kind of high impact and high an inspiring thing to look at, to be completely honest. This is exactly what I want to see my students doing as an academic myself. Shriti made mention to the white paper that we've worked on in partnership with Times Higher. And what we've actually done here is we've done a bit of a deep dive with one of our kind of key institutional partners, the University of West London, to look into the observations that they've identified since the adoption and the rollout of Perlego, covering everything from student discovery, the use of AI, and even down to the learning tools that are designed to help students engage with digital reading more effectively. So I'll leave this slide up for a little bit and encourage you to scan the QR code if you're able to, and give it a read yourself. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. In fact, one of the key points that we have discussed in depth in the white paper is how advancements in technology have led to pedagogical changes and new learning preferences among students. I think that offers a great starting point for our conversation today. So my first question is, from your perspective, how do you think technology is shaping what students expect from higher education these days? Who would like to get us started?
I'll start if you like. I've just finished teaching an online module to campus-based students, which was a surprise to a lot of them. And it was really interesting just how diverse their expectations were and how differently they engage with it. I mean, I had everything from people complaining that there weren't any lectures, through to people who really appreciated the flexibility of being able to study online. They made contacts with other students, they built their networks, they engaged with employers, and did a whole host of things that they probably wouldn't have been able to do if it had been solely in a classroom. So yeah, and everything in between. So I think there isn't a single answer to that question, but my experience was certainly very diverse.
Thank you, Lisa. Annika, would you like to come in on this point?
Yeah, I mean, completely agree with Lisa. And I think the other thing we see is in terms of expectations, students expect materials, learning content, whatever that looks like, to be available instantly and all the time. So there is no, many of them would not be satisfied if we say, you know, you're going to get this next week. If you mention it, they want it. And I think what Matt has just talked about in some ways, you know, show if you give them access to lots of materials, they use it, but also they expect them to be there. And I think the other side of it is also that the expectation is that there's a diversity of learning materials and learning approaches. So they don't just want text, they want all kinds of different ways of engaging with materials, from listening it to reading it to doing little simulations online or supported through tech, all these kind of things. So I think for me, those are some of the key expectations. I can't think of the word, the very instant nature of having access to it everywhere, but also in lots of different ways.
Thank you, Annika. And Chris, please go ahead.
Thank you. I'd completely agree with colleagues that there's a real range, a real spectrum of demand, so you can't really sort of pigeonhole anything. But I think it ranges from that really sort of instantaneous on demand to actually an expectation of a traditional university experience at the same time. I think Lisa said about students surprised there was nothing in person, and there is still quite a traditional view of university in some context of I come and I sit in a large lecture theatre to be spoken to by an expert, and I will surround myself with books in a physical learning space. And I think a lot of it is understanding where the students are, both in terms of what they need, but also what they expect, and trying to meet them in that kind of on-demand space, but in a measured way as well. Because obviously giving everything up front might be what's expected, because I can go home and binge watch a series on Netflix this evening. Sorry to use a really sort of overused analogy, but equally that might not be best for me in terms of, you know, scaffolding the overall learning journey. So I think there's that need for kind of a real open dialogue to both understand where those diverse approaches are in the classroom, but also make sure that we're then communicating what we're doing and why we're doing it. Because, you know, what Lisa described sounds fascinating, but that won't work in every context. So you need to make sure students understand why they're doing it in that way, in that context.
Yeah, I mean, that's...
Yes, please go ahead, Matt.
I mean, yeah, completely agree. And I think the key point there you mentioned is scaffolding, right? And how we actually position and frame what students are expected to do and how they should interact with their whole learning experience. The area that's been quite interesting for me, particularly on the kind of topic around like personalization, and it is actually observing and hearing from students who are being prescribed reading, for example, and they're then trying to find something that is touching the same subject area, but from a different perspective. And that's been really quite fascinating for me to hear more and more, particularly as students are, you know, within Perlego and leveraging their own the discovery element of our platform. So how we help students actually find content that's relevant to their subject matter. And so the example you gave, Chris, of you know, students who need to kind of find the right level for their own knowledge and understanding. Actually, even hearing from students who are studying a second year in a subject and go down to foundational level text, for example, you know, that for me is really encouraging and shows actually how personalization can become accessible as well. It's often seen as something, and I remember designing courses a few years back where actually developing flexible learning environments or flexible pedagogy can be really, really challenging and actually a very high level of competency from a learning design perspective. But actually, if you give students the ability to shape their own path in some ways with those guardrails from an academic perspective, that can be really, really quite powerful.
Those are some really interesting observations, and technology indeed has changed how we live and learn. I'm also curious about the way this affects how students participate and connect with their learning. What impact does this have, or this change has, on students' wider engagement with the learning process? I think we've touched on this a little bit, but it would be interesting to build on that point. Chris, would you like to come in on that?
Like you read my mind, I was trying to find the raise my hand icon. Yeah, I think one of the challenges is there's a number of different challenges that we face with sort of the use of technology, because it creates that on-demand opportunity, but also students are potentially then used to in their everyday life engaging with things at a time that suits them. So therefore, the wider economic pressures on them, for example, the need to work or perhaps the need to pick up caring responsibilities in their family unit, can obviously create a potential barrier to their ability to engage with, potentially live webinars or coming onto campus for personalized learning experiences. So I think there's a need to recognize, again, sort of going back to the point about seeing students where they are, recognizing the barriers that they face, whether it's through digital exclusion or potentially the in-person opportunities. I think those flexible learning opportunities exist both in the digital and physical spheres, and trying to design something that recognises and adjusts to those challenges is the big thing we've got to think about there.
Yes, Matt, please go ahead.
An area that I have, from speaking to academics across the sector over the last couple of years, an area that I've heard come up quite consistently is around literacies and the development of student literacies in various formats, but particularly around critical literacies, and partly because actually of the proliferation of AI, particularly over the last couple of years. Now, we did joke before joining this call, how long would it be until we talked about AI? And I'm sorry to do it within 17 minutes, but actually, I think this is a really important point, because this is a really good example of seeing the evolution of expectations from both an academic perspective, but also from a student perspective, and how there could be a bit of a misalignment between the two in some ways. And actually, institutions trying to keep up with setting policy, setting expectations, setting standards, setting guardrails on things like the development of AI, for example, is actually really quite challenging, right? And there's a lot of good practice and a lot of kind of questionable practice, I would say, in across the sector, really. And actually, as students are trying to find the right fit for how they're leveraging this kind of technology, I think what becomes even more important is where institutions are essentially saying, what is acceptable and what is not, in some ways, or providing tools that are kind of deemed as trustworthy in some ways, I guess you could say. And something that's become, with this evolution, something that's become even more apparent to me is the impact of digital poverty, for example. So actually, students who are priced out of using some of these technologies, which are now becoming not just commonplace, but in some cases expected as the status quo. And that's something that actually, as a sector, we've got to be really, really mindful of.
We will definitely, before we move on, Annika, I'll come to you.
I might have accidentally moving us on, because I wanted to sort of build on what Matt has just said in different ways. So one is, I think, engagement is something where many universities are struggling, but also I think it's sometimes trying to understand, what do we mean by engagement? Do we mean humans in a room, or do we mean all kinds of other engagement where they read materials, where they do their own research, where they have conversations with an AI tool about a topic, listen to podcasts, or whatever it is? So sort of, what do we mean by engagement? And I think that's a question that still boggles a lot of us in the sector. And in terms of for instance, digital poverty, I think those are really important things. And when it comes to literacy, I would say we don't just need to consider critical literacy, which is important and really crucial for higher education, but also digital literacy. We're assuming, because of the age of at least our undergrad students, or the majority of our undergrad student cohorts, that they're completely digital literate. Doesn't mean they are. So we have to bear that in mind. And of course, also that of staff. We can also not assume that all of them know how to do this. And it's sort of on both ends. And then all the availability of hardware, internet connection, right software, and all of that then comes on top of potentially hindering engagement with a lot of interesting new innovative things the university is trying to do.
Thank you. And Lisa.
Yeah, that's very much what I was planning to say, really, that we mustn't fall into that trap of assuming that all students are expert in these things, because they're very much not. I mean, one of the biggest surprises that I've had recently really has been just how reluctant they are to, or how reluctant many of them are to even participate in a conversation online. They'll say that they're worried that they'll look silly if they've got it wrong, or that their answer isn't as good as somebody else's. And this seems to be a real barrier with many of them. Or having their camera on in a session. That's another big no-no in many cases. And trying to say to people that when you're in the workplace, you're going to be in this kind of environment like we're in now quite a lot. Even if you're office based, you're going to be on these calls, and it's becoming a very basic requirement that you can communicate in a professional way, either like we're doing now or through asynchronous exchange of messages or whatever. But it still seemed to be quite a challenge for many students.
I mean, I completely agree with everything that's just been said there, and I think it's a common experience that's being seen, globally in higher ed at the moment and beyond. I actually want to come back to something that Annika mentioned that I think is really important, and we could, if not careful, lose sight of, which is around engagement. And we're in a world now where a lot is measured. We're using technologies that provide data and analytics and that kind of thing, and so there can often be an association where engagement has to be measured, and actually engagement in the academic process is such a personal thing. And a student, as Annika kind of just mentioned, it could be going off and listening to a podcast while walking the dog related to the subject matter, or watching something on YouTube, or actually having a chat with a peer over a coffee. It's still engagement with the academic process. And a lot of those things are not measurable, nor should they be measurable, because actually it's a personal thing, your personal discovery in the learning space. So I just want to kind of call that out, actually, that we as a sector can't and shouldn't rely entirely on the measurement of engagement as a proxy for how active a student is in the learning process. Because that could actually become quite a dangerous space to be in. Sorry, final thought there.
Speaking about the interplay between finances and digital inclusion that a number of panelists have touched on, can we speak more about how universities can identify and address financial barriers related to digital access? Going back to that point about digital poverty. Yes, Chris, please.
Thanks. Yeah, I think it comes from a design point. So recognizing that students are coming from lots of different perspectives. I think, not assuming that digital native approach as well. So building things up both in terms of the platforms you're using and also the guidance you provide as to how we're using the platforms and how the students can use those platforms. So, for example, we use Blackboard Ultra at Aston, which is mobile first design. So recognizing that a lot of students will be accessing this content on their mobile phones. It's designed to present neatly on those devices rather than kind of converting something that's designed for a desktop computer into a phone situation. Also trying to have some design principles, so trying to avoid click-throughs and downloads within your VLE content. So we want to create that opportunity for students to have that online, instantly accessible learning content that Annika referred to earlier, trying to ensure that that can be done in a way where it's fairly seamless and flow through, rather than having to click through multiple screens or download a document that then you may not be able to access easily on a handheld device. I think as well, recognizing that students may not have access to hardware, or the hardware they have may not necessarily have the computing power that some things need. So we use something called Apps Anywhere, where basically students can log on through the portal and then use the apps without having to download them directly onto their device. So recognizing essentially that students can't do everything on the devices they have, so therefore trying to facilitate their access to them, rather than saying use this great app which you can't actually get access to.
Interestingly, sorry, a point just to follow up from that. We have a mobile app in our platform, and what we find is that 30% of students or users, I should say, use that as their primary method for accessing their digital reading. And this is something that similar topic, but this is something that we heard a lot about in the pandemic, where a lot of systems within universities weren't geared towards a responsive design or mobile first experience, or didn't follow some of the kind of the like universal design for learning principles that you've just kind of referred to there, Chris. And actually, that just made the digital poverty experience even wider, really. So, the fact that we are still seeing around 30% of our user base actually going to the mobile device first just kind of re-emphasizes how important that point is that you've just made.
Yes, Annika, please go ahead.
Yeah, and also just reiterating what Chris has said, and sort of again pushing it in a slightly different direction. Maybe I think this, considering all of this universal design for learning and mobile first and all of these aspects are even more important if we consider other aspects of poverty that our students are experiencing as well. If we think of our commuting students at our institution, the number of commuting students has significantly increased over the last few years. And with cost of living rising and so forth, some students just financially cannot make it to campus because they can't afford the train ticket or the petrol or the fuel. They might need to work part-time and it doesn't work with their shifts and carrying responsibilities that I think Matt has mentioned before as well. So there can be all kinds of reasons, and then making sure that if they cannot come to some of the on-campus things, that they at least are able to fully access the digital side of the learning experience, because otherwise they sort of miss out double, as they're already potentially missing out on the in-person interactions, in-class discussions and so forth, which we know are still very important for many students as part of the learning, but some cannot make it. So ensuring that the alternative is accessible for them on many levels, not just mobile first, but ensuring that it works with all kinds of assistive technology things and everything that people are using, from screen readers to magnification to color contrast, so all kinds of things they might need, I think is even more important the more our students are facing different types of poverty or financial situations themselves.
Thank you, Chris.
I completely agree with everything that Annika said, and I think I'd just add to that as well. When students can get onto campus, making it as easy for them as possible when they're here. So, the traditional thing of ensuring that Wi-Fi is working across the campus, making sure there are adequate study spaces, because the nature of the academic timetable is that you might be here for 2 hours, then have a 3-hour gap, and then be back again for an hour, or various, you might have a personal tutor meeting interspersed amongst your lectures and tutorials. So making sure that there are spaces that students can go to where they don't need to expend huge amounts of money for being here. You don't have to go and get a coffee at £3.50 in order to utilise a space. You've got adequate study spaces with access to PCs, with decent food, etc. That's creating that sticky campus feel almost, but that's not too expensive to stick around on.
Sticky campus is a phrase that I think I heard I used to be a student president in a previous life, and sticky campus I think I first heard mentioned in 2011, and actually the problems that you are referring to there, particularly around like timetabling, stacking and that kind of thing, the fact that this is still a problem that is still being talked about is somewhat astonishing, to be completely honest. I mean, it's now that we're talking about the financial hardship of students more and more, this is probably one of the most important things for me when it comes to a physical environment. We still expect students to travel potentially, for hours and pay exorbitant fees to get the train to campus, etc. For like a 2-hour lecture that may actually be cancelled, and they've got to do it for the next 3 times that week. And actually, timetable stacking is something we've talked about for so long. And is there any institution that's kind of cracked this yet? Because continuing to hear about this, and the fact it's still a problem is really worrying.
Thank you. Annika, would you like to chime in?
I was trying to go a different direction, but to your question, I think there are not that many institutions that have really cracked this, and I think it's for many reasons becoming more complicated. I wanted to add on the provision side, when it comes to digital aspects, we always have to consider staff as well, both the academics teaching as well as the professional service colleagues who are supporting all of the teaching and education learning related activities, because we expect people to make very engaging videos and all kinds of things, or do create all kinds of digital assets without necessarily training them, but also without them necessarily having the right tech, the right internet connectivity if they're working from home. Sometimes lack of internet connectivity if they're working from the office. So I think we also have to consider those aspects for all the staff involved, because otherwise the experience for the student will be not as seamless, not as engaging, and useful for them either, if the staff on the other side are struggling as well.
Thank you. Lisa, before I come to you, that's one of the, I want to speak a little bit more about the point that Annika made, which is one of the main points that the white paper explores, the growing importance of accessibility and flexibility. And Chris, you talk about this in the white paper, how universities must recognize different and new types of learners. And we've also spoken about how what opportunities digital tools offer for creating flexible learning experiences. So Annika, building on the point that you were just mentioning, what resources and support do educators need to be able to capitalize on these opportunities?
I think we could talk on that for hours, but I think some of the main things is ensuring digital literacy, and to use the buzzword at the moment as well, AI literacy. For instance, our Vice Dean Education and Student Experience has co-developed a whole AI literacy training that all of our teaching staff now have to go through. So we actually know what's out there, what we can do, and then how to support our students in this process as well. So not just for us, but also how we can help staff, help staff help the students use it. And I think in other areas, it's understanding the basics of accessibility, because even something as simple as alt text is still very much unknown to many in the higher education sector, that they should add alt text to all their visual content, that there should be captions on all video based content and so forth. So sometimes making sure that there's training in place and awareness in place for some of these very basic accessibility features. And beyond that, also in the way how we teach, to ensure that if we have things on slides and we're talking about them, whether that's in person, online, or in a recorded video, that we're describing what's on the slide. So you don't rely on the fact that you need to see it. Because again, if we go back to our students, for instance, being on mobile phones, they might not actually be able to see it because it might get too small. They might not be able to see it because of a vision impairment. They might not be able to process it because of a neurodivergence. They might be dealing with a sibling, a child, a care situation for an elder family member, and aren't always able to look at it. So they need to be able to hear it, but vice versa also for those who struggle listening, they need to be able to read it. So it really comes down for me to how we do things in the classroom, whether that's a real one or a virtual one, but also ensuring that some of the very basic accessibility knowledge is known to all staff. And this is something that is really lacking across the sector.
Thank you. Lisa, would you like to come in on that point?
Yeah, I think the danger is that we could lose some of the benefits that we've gained in terms of accessibility and financial benefits to students of being able to engage online, if, using the dreaded AI words again, there's a push in some parts of the sector for back to in-person exams, for example. And in those situations, you obviously haven't got the flexibility. You've got to be in a certain place at a certain time, and it's going to cost you a lot of money, and it might not be convenient, etc. So I just think we need to be aware that it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and try and avoid sort of going back to the dark ages in that respect?
It's actually one of my biggest fears for higher education at the moment, to be completely honest, Lisa. I think I've attended a number of conferences and events over the years where we've talked about digital learning and the fact that the pedagogy should be informing the technology, not vice versa. And actually, what you're describing there is the complete inverse of that. And that feels like a very I'm trying to think of the metaphor to use here, but it's a bad idea. I think we'll just leave it at that. But yeah, I mean that there's so much research now that's coming out around the negative connotations and negative impact of face-to-face exams for certain groups of students. The University of Sussex have recently done some research into this area, and if we get to a point where we're being forced back into a 800-person room, for large scale exams, that would be deeply concerning. So, yeah. But then the inverse of that is the further proliferation of technology such as proctoring that could obviously have a similar level of negative experience. So I'm not sure what the right balance is here. But yeah, a big concern for me is that we are forced back into the dark ages, like you say.
Chris, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I think building on what colleagues have said as well is we need to make sure staff understand sort of the different issues that students face and get the support they need. But also, we run the risk of reinventing the wheel as well. So I like the fact that Annika talked about creating a guide on certain aspects. But for example, we talked about accessible VLE content. Actually, we want to sort of consider from a user experience point of view and ensure that your learning experience is relatively consistent across modules. If you go onto a landing page, it's pretty much the same. You know where to find your assessment information, you know where to find your employability links, you know where to find your student voice content and utilize it, because it's not in different places and different modules. So you're not doing 4 different things at the same time on a program of study. You're using them in a similar way. So I think trying to all the things we've identified potentially increase workload on academic colleagues, because they have to be alert to all these different things and build them into their design, which creates a pressure. But actually we can make that journey a lot easier by scaffolding it for colleagues as well. So for example, having Blackboard templates and guidance on how to create it, etc., to the extent that still allows that academic freedom to come through, but also doesn't have an inconsistent student experience at the end of it.
Sorry, Matt, you're on mute.
I did so well. I can't believe I made it this far without doing that. Apologies. It's interesting you talk about that. I actually did some research into this area when I was previously a learning technologist, looking into exactly this, the student experience in virtual learning environments. And one of the main things that came out was actually the confusion that emerged because of inconsistency. And that was everything from, laying out the syllabus, or laying out like where to find the module guide, or where they find assessment information, or how to get in touch, and all that kind of thing. And the main outcome main recommendations from this research was that actually working with a central teaching and learning team to develop templates, to co-design templates at a faculty or departmental level, but with student involvement as well, just to make sure that actually students' needs were being met. And that's something I strongly advocate for. Firstly, departmental level, but secondary being the co-design element, and that really did actually have quite a big impact, in the science faculty that I worked in, not just in kind of student satisfaction with online learning environments, but actually student engagement with online learning environments, even down to changing the dynamics for how students actually ask questions or ask for clarifications, or work together using discussion boards, that kind of thing. So just throwing that out there as an idea if there's any institutional leaders listening.
We've touched on the growing influence of AI within the higher education sector. So to follow up on that, I'm interested in getting the panel's thoughts on the role of technology in helping universities better understand and respond to changing learning preferences among students. Lisa, could I come to you first?
You're asking about the role of AI in this?
Yeah, essentially.
Well, I'll use my expression of double-edged sword again. I think AI has been instrumental for many of my students this year and last in really improving their critical thinking if they've used it well. It's also the other side of the coin. It's also probably meant that some students have got away with doing very little, far less than they should have done if they've used it inappropriately. So I mean, what I very much try to focus on is, and then it was the same before, before AI was concerned, I said the same thing about social media, that it should be a force for good, and that if you can encourage people to use it in positive ways and give examples of how it can be used in positive ways, then that's hopefully tipping the scales a little bit in the right direction. And I'm seeing very much the same with AI. And I think we can't rely too much on the technology itself. It's got to be that human input. It's the values of the tutor, the values of the students, sort of harnessing the positive aspects of that and sort of pushing the dial in the right direction. Not the technology itself being inherently good or bad. So that's probably a very incoherent way of describing what's still sort of semi-formed thoughts.
Thank you. Chris, your thought on that?
Thank you. Not incoherent at all, Lisa. I think it really sensible points. And yeah, you're completely right. It can really enhance that critical thinking if used right. And I think we said right at the outset about meeting students where they are and understanding their approaches. And I think AI is really sort of true of that. I spoke to some students recently and I got a real spectrum of views, of the sense of some people embracing it because they really saw how it could enhance their productivity and make things better for them. And some who were avoiding it at all costs, either for a fear of getting caught out or because they were feared being de-skilled and replaced by robots, and kind of, there's anything in between the two as well. So I think that we need to build the education of the AI tools into what we're doing, so we can ensure an equitable approach for students, almost like do it head first right from day one and build it through everything, and we need to be permissive, not dismissive of it as well. So we're having conversations earlier about do's and don'ts of AI, and actually I think it should be more hows and whys, because we are going to be using these tools. We're already using them as part of our everyday practices. So we need to be open and transparent about it, but also make sure we're using it in an ethical, sustainable, and effective way as much as anything. If you put garbage in, you get garbage out. So prompt engineering, understanding what it can and what it can't do, that it isn't the answer to everything, but it will cut a lot of the difficulty out for you. I think that we can embed that from the outset of the student journey and make sure it's threaded throughout. Then we can really help prepare students for the future, and do so in an equitable way as possible.
Thank you, Matt. Yes.
There we go. I have a few things on this topic actually. So firstly, I wanted to call out some excellent practice that I've seen. So both University College London and Lancaster University have done some really, I would say, exceptional work around embedding AI skills and practice in both academic support and student journeys. So really worth a bit of a Google on that if you get the chance. I think a lot of what we're talking about here stems from actually learning the fundamentals, both in the actual use of AI in an effective way, like you were describing, Chris, the kind of prompt engineering space, but then I guess the kind of supplementary areas of understanding misinformation and disinformation, building on that kind of critical lens where you can actually identify if something might have, false narratives or that kind of thing, knowing what good looks like, knowing what bad looks like, knowing where to use it properly, where not. And all this is kind of encapsulated in what I was just describing from UCL and Lancaster. So again, worth a look. I like the point you've made on garbage in, garbage out. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges actually that we're seeing across the sector at the moment, where, we'll all be familiar with a very widely known large language model, and students are regularly using these kind of platforms for everything from very basic kind of basic prompting to actually trying to get the answer. But the challenge there is that a lot of these tools are trained based on just the internet, which is full of garbage. So actually, this is why when we started to develop systems within Perlego, we were really intentional about what we were doing here. So, you know, I think the tech providers actually have a very important role to play in this space as well. When we started building out features, you know, to leverage this new technology, we were very intentional about like how can we do this for good rather than evil. We actually started with establishing some AI principles that we built in conjunction with our institutional partners, so that we could understand like where should we be applying AI effectively and where should we not. And we actually focused on discovery, because students have, you know, 1.3 million books thereabouts in our platform. Trying to actually find what's relevant to them is very difficult, but actually we could leverage artificial intelligence to make that far more accessible. And what we've actually found now is that students are reading about I think it's 2.3 times more books when they discover an array of content around their subject area of interest than just looking for a specific book. And I think that's an example of good, where it can be applied well. The final point I wanted to just touch on here is actually related to, I think, something you said as well, Chris, around essentially graduate attributes. And I think one of the challenges that I observe is that this is an ever evolving space. We're not just seeing AI kind of proliferating through the education space, but also through the, you know, through the professional space. And, you know, I look at how this is being used in my own company, and it seems to change daily. And so a kind of question for each of you, really: how do we design with the future employment in mind when that is evolving itself?
Before we go into much depth about that skills development and employability piece, I will come to Chris really quickly.
Thank you. I almost regretted putting my hand up whether I was about to answer the question that I hadn't intended to there, so thank you.
I wasn't intending to set you up there, Chris, sorry.
I think I just want to kind of follow up on what Matt said, and I think that it can be used as a real tool for good on so many levels. So, for example, one of the things we're doing at Aston, and certainly in the college that I'm in, Business Social Sciences, we developed as a university something called Power Skills, and one of those is AI and digital, and we're front loading that at the beginning of the students' course. So that point we said about addressing the students and making sure that they understand from day one what AI can be and what it shouldn't be, and some of the benefits but also downfalls of it, kind of placing in their welcome week activities. And the way we're looking to design that will allow for community building exercises and real sort of discussion and bonding between students as well. I know there's the James Comer quote about no significant learning without a significant relationship, and that can be read in many different ways. But, you know, that learning from peers is a key part of what we're trying to embed, you know, with the challenges of AI and all the engagement issues we talked about already. So by trying to sort of put that front and center, getting students to share their experiences, their understandings, and see sort of the ethical implications as well, the real opportunity to both support engagement and community building, but also develop those kind of graduate attributes that we can thread throughout the programs as well.
Before we go back to Matt's question about employability and skills development, if I could stay with you for another minute, Chris. With the rapid evolution of AI, you did mention the spectrum of attitudes that students have about different tools, especially AI. So what are the best strategies that universities can use to keep up with these changes, and also the different attitudes students have towards those tools?
Wow, I think I'd have preferred Matt's question. I think open communication and transparency really has got to be the only way forward. We can't get ahead of the curve because the curve is ahead of us, and there are far more capable people than I that are developing these tools for various different purposes. But I think being transparent in how we're using them, making students aware of what they can do, and also the limitations around them, and speaking to our students about their uses. I think Sam Altman said recently that sort of the Generation A students are using ChatGPT and similar as their operating system, whereas people of my generation perhaps are using it as an alternative to Google. And I think understanding that sort of different approach is going to be really important, and then learning from each other and having that kind of co-creation and co-design, I think Matt touched upon earlier, is the only way we can really keep on top, well, not necessarily keep on top of, but keep abreast of sort of something that's constantly evolving.
Annika or Lisa, could I also get your thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think, rather than sort of focusing too much on teaching how to use a specific tool, it's more about sort of preparing students for an uncertain future. So, teaching them to be tolerant of change, in fact, to welcome change, to have resilience, and an attitude of lifelong learning, and that, they're not just going to learn a set of stuff and that will set them up for life. And I think that those seem very obvious points, but to my mind, that's going to have more benefit than sort of trying to second guess what might happen in 2 years or 1 year's time, which nobody really knows. That could be an opportunity or a threat, or both.
I agree. I would really say one of the things for us as educators is to bring across that all of these are tools. And as we've discussed before, tools are ambivalent. They can be used for good, they can be used for harm. And every tool has its limitations. We all know that if we want to shorten a dress or a pair of trousers, a hammer probably wouldn't be the best tool to use. It would somehow get the job done, but there are other tools that are much more effective. And I think teaching and supporting students and learners in understanding and these kind of concepts. What can tools offer me? What are its limitations? What are reasonable and useful alternatives? That is much more useful than us always trying to stay on top, as exactly as Lisa and Chris have said, because we can't really stay on top of it because it's changing so quickly that we need to equip them with dealing with uncertainty, something so many people are struggling with, adapting, understanding, asking the right questions, and trying to understand, looking at different sources, all these things that are part of critical thinking, but in a much sort of more, let's say, sped up way, where things can change quickly. So they need to go through these processes a lot more quickly than their peers would have had to do in the past.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, but before we wrap up and take questions from the audience, I would like to get your thoughts on the skills development aspect that we spoke about just a few minutes before. So with the changes in skills demand prompted by AI and its digital kin, how can universities design learning experiences that develop students' critical skills and boost their employability? And within that, what role do digital tools play in supporting skills development and preparing students for what is a rapidly evolving workforce? Yes, Annika.
I think we really have to rebuild our educational provision around skills, this concept of skills 4.0. We as humans offer that tech, at least at the moment, or maybe in the near future, can't offer. We've recently, for instance, redone our entire undergrad degree to focus on skills, thinking very hard about what do students need to do. It's around critical thinking, it's about creativity, it's about, challenging others, questioning responsibility, and all of these aspects. And in that, all kinds of technology, as you called them, they're tools. We can use them in different ways. We can use our students to, maybe even have them write an assignment with AI and then mark it and see how much of it was useful, how much was hallucinations and other or completely made up nonsense. So I think those kind of questions. And the other bit, I think we really have to consider, especially in business schools, to make our assessments much more authentic, to link them more towards what the market wants, what the workplace needs. And for that, we also need to continuously engage with employers. We can't just develop something and let it run for a while. We need to be in that constant dialogue with employers in all kinds of sectors to really keep feeding that into what we're doing, so that the students have the skills that they need when they leave the university.
Would anyone else like to chime in on that question about how universities can better support students? Yes, Chris, and then I'll come to you, Matt.
I'll keep it brief, Matt. Yeah, completely agree with everything Annika said, and I think we can use AI tools to fill the gap that some of the challenges of scale present at the moment. So in our pharmacy school, for example, they use SimConverse to support conversational learning. So for example, prescribing pharmacists, you might have to have challenging conversations about certain drug prescriptions. On a placement, you may not find yourself in a situation where you have those challenging conversations, depending on where you are and the time of year, etc. So by using AI platforms where you can develop and sort of respond to different challenges and learn from it, I think we can build that authenticity and development of interpersonal skills, but using the technology to enhance that, and really think about AI as augmenting the work we're doing rather than replacing the work we're doing.
Following on quite nicely, actually, from that, I think as Annika was talking, I was just writing down a few things, and creating safe spaces for failure and experimentation, I think, is really, really important. And actually, the example that was just given of, essentially a student peer marking an AI written essay is an absolutely fabulous concept, and I think it's something I've seen work really well, not just in this AI topic, but in other areas as well. So that the key thing there is about safe space and actually creating a safe environment where students can see what bad looks like and what good looks like and figure it out themselves as well. When we've talked, the kind of root of this question was around literacies, and I think the thing that I still believe quite firmly is we still need to focus deeper on the fundamentals, particularly when it comes to things like critical literacies. That is something that permeates through our whole existence in academia, and actually has relation to every single discipline, every single module, every single subject area, every single interaction within a university space. But actually, that is often still not fully embedded. And I think that embedding piece, so it's not just like, we're going to focus on literacies in this first week of term, is really important for me. And actually, when I've looked into this in other areas, particularly around like digital reading practice, for example, the best impact is when this is scaffolded and part of like a staggered curriculum. And so that's the real thing I'd kind of advocate for, embedding these literacies, not just at one point in time, but actually progressively throughout a discipline. And just building on what was just said from Chris as well around, in fact, and Annika, apologies, feedback loops. I mean, we really need to continue to engage with employers and the sector, not just like direct employers that we have partnership with, to make sure that we are continuously evolving in this space, because we can't keep up with what's going on, and the expectations, as we touched on, from the sector or sectors are changing rapidly. So actually having those feedback loops on, this is what we're teaching, how does this interact with what you're expecting, how are our graduates actually progressing into your employment, all of that kind of stuff. So as a body, we can continue to evolve, I guess, really.
Thank you. We are almost out of time, but we have a really interesting question in the Q&A format. So the statistic that students are not only reading set text, but also around their subject is great to see. But how do you measure reading or engagement with online text rather than text being open? Can I get your response to that really quickly, Matt?
Yeah, sure. I've already responded in the chat, actually. But the key thing here is we're not just measuring opens, but we're measuring time actually engaging through pages and through the body of text. So to get a bit technical, we're recording minutes of movement in the page and actually using various techniques to associate if a student is idle on a page or if it's a natural navigation and all of that kind of stuff. So we're using something slightly more advanced than just the book has been opened. So in the statistic I provided, we were actually aggregating that data into minutes and hours, not just book opens.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. Many thanks to our panelists for making this such an engaging and insightful conversation, and to everyone in the audience for joining us and being a part of the discussion. We hope you found the conversation valuable and are leaving with some useful ideas to take forward. We will share a recording of this webinar and a post-event summary article with you in the coming days. Thank you once again, and goodbye.